and Adam.
Thanks, Rob. Kia ora koutou all. Obviously, my name's Brad, and I guess I've got the sort of honour and the privilege, I suppose, of being the last flying C-130H pilot in the RNZAF, as we obviously retired the fleet following 6 decades of dedicated service to the people of New Zealand. So I'd equally like to, I guess, share my thanks and gratitude to the members of Christchurch and Canterbury who sort of helped facilitate the actual arrival of 01 here into Wigram, and managed, I guess, much to the museum's sort of delight, avoid the opposite outcome, which might have been sort of moving the aircraft into multiple pieces and trying to put it on a truck. So getting it here in one piece is a really big win, and that didn't happen in isolation, thanks to the members of public from the local area, but equally your emergency services, New Zealand Police, Fire and Emergency, Christchurch Airport, and of course St John's, who all played a key role in getting this activity sort of done efficiently and safely, so that we can preserve the history for generations to come. So thank you to all of those in the room. Is there anyone who's not from Canterbury in the room? Where are we from?
Bay of Plenty.
Bay of Plenty?
Hastings.
All right, nice. Anywhere else? Anyone from overseas?
England.
England, all right, welcome. It's a great place to be. All right, well, here's hoping that there's international attractions to come for years, particularly once the museum team get the new exhibit hall out the front. It'll be, as I understand, it'll be a unique one place in the world where you'll actually have a P3 Orion and a C-130 Hercules housed in the same sort of shed together. So keep up the good fundraising activities, and encourage everyone to come and visit the museum, and hopefully we'll get them rightfully displayed out there in the near future. But in the short term, we're going to just sort of step you through a short video in a moment, which will sort of set the scene for what was achieved here in February with the wider team, and then we'll step through a bit of a presentation on how we got there. So we'll just we'll whip up this video now. Some of you may have seen this video before. It's not quite viral, but it's out there across the internet. You'll see in there someone who looks a lot like me talking during this video, alongside the current Chief of Air Force, Air Vice Marshal Darren Webb, who foolishly was my instructor on the C-130 in 2009 and gave me my qualifications to fly the aircraft. So he himself was a C-130 pilot. Today marks 60 years of service for an incredible flying machine that's been the heart of the RNZAF for the last 6 decades.
And as we think about its service concluding here in Wigram, it's, for me, entirely fitting. It's last landing in the birthplace of the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and importantly, it'll be available for generations to come through the Air Force Museum.
This aircraft has served many New Zealanders, foreign partners and militaries across the globe, and it just means so much to so many.
We've done a lot of work to ensure it was going to be done safely, and I think we absolutely saw that. And the crew are trained, professional, they know what they're doing, and gee, I was proud to see them conclude right here at Wigram. I've been fortunate enough to be serving on the C-130 Hercules since 2009, so 15 years. We knew today's activity was always going to be a challenge, and would test the professionalism. The first approach was a touch and go around. It was a planned activity to ensure that we could safely achieve the required profile. And we got it in on the second approach, and the wind was in our favour. Look, I think all those, no matter whether they're operating aircrew, ground support, or even those in which if this aircraft's come to their aid in their time of need, will have a very strong sort of thoughts and opinion of the C-130. It's no different for us. Everybody who's operated has a very soft spot for it, that's for sure. It's a pretty surreal feeling, and I think as we came to a stop, what we thought about was the 6 decades of people who had been before us, and that we were the end of this chapter. What a moment. Very emotional for all those here on the ground watching, and I think it's a great way to conclude a hugely successful history.
Cool. So this brief was put together by Squadron leader Max Longdell. He was the co-pilot on the landing, and he was the one that you heard in the video talking to Christchurch Tower. So this was put together for us at 40 Squadron to keep as a record of how we executed this activity, to show future generations of aircrew how we got 01 here to Wigram. So we would normally present this at home, but so there might be a few terms or phrases in here that don't make sense if you're not in the aviation environment. But we'll try and explain those, try and help you make sense of what you went through and what we achieved here. So this wasn't something that we thought of overnight or just decided to do in February. There was about 18 months of planning and work that went into this. It started with the Air Component Commander, Air Commodore Andy Scott, and the Museum Director walking out onto the tarmac and basically going, oh yeah, it looks big enough. The Air Component Commander, being an previous commanding officer of 40 Squadron and C-130 pilot, he has some reference of what he's looking at, but we wanted to be a little bit more certain. So we went about trying to have Wigram surveyed to turn it into a runway, essentially. We don't have that capability inside the Defence Force, so we've reached out to our friends in the Royal Australian Air Force Airfield Engineering team to come over and survey the paddock, as it was then, to turn it into a landing zone. They came out December 2023 while we were also here on IceCube, or Operation Antarctica, conducting flights to the continent. And they spent 2-3 days at Wigram surveying it and producing basically the length that we had from fence to fence, as well as also identifying the critical obstacles. So the critical obstacles are basically the things we need to avoid to be able to get it in here. It's well documented. The tree on the fence here is the critical obstacle for landing, and then off the other end is the massive tree by the New Zealand Archives building, and then the motorway bridge beyond that. They suggested a bit of work to improve the smoothness of the landing zone. So the big concern we had was the transition of grass to tarmac to grass. If you've been out to C01, there's a taxiway that runs through the middle of the strip. We had concerns over the transition off the back side of that, where there was a significant dip in it, and what that would mean for our braking. Would we need to stop braking to cross that? What would that do to the length required for us to stop? So we filled in that dip with a fairly significant amount of metal and compacted it to make a nice, smooth landing zone for the crew to land on. And I'll let the pilot talk about approach angles.
Thanks, Farms. All right, so we were on this journey. We started this journey, and this is sort of about a year or so out from actually conducting the activity. We had a known and planned retirement date for the fleet, which was always going to be early 2025. So we had the year of 2024 to start working through some of these. Some of the scoping as to whether this was still plausible. Take it from a concept, from the Air Component Commanders, sort of, I've got a good idea, into can we actually execute. So we took the data that we got from our friends in Australia, which was really helpful. Being slightly engineering, a lot of graphs, a lot of tables. But when we look at this bottom graph here, what this is sort of telling us is these are the intended or potential approach angles, and they're measured in degrees. 3-degree approach angle, which is this line here, is sort of a standard approach for an aircraft across the world. Doesn't sort of matter what type of aircraft you are. 3 degrees is a nice sort of compromise between being really steep and having energy control issues with your aircraft versus being really low and sort of creating a bit of a noise or obstacle issues as you're coming in over urban areas. So 3 degrees is pretty standard, no different for a C-130. That's what we would fly on any given day. We can see on a 3 degree approach path that what that gives us is a ground distance available for the Wigram landing zone of just shy of 2,100 feet. And we sort of immediately knew that 2,100 feet wasn't a lot. And we sort of went, we think we might like some more. So we looked at our options, and essentially flying a steeper approach over top of the critical obstacle that Adam was talking about would give us a slightly elongated distance on the ground. So we're just shy of 2,300 feet at 6 degrees, which is what we settled on. 6 degrees we thought was probably going to be manageable with aircraft energy, as we're in a relatively steep descent. We still wanted to keep the aircraft slow, so we didn't want it accelerating on the way down. But at the same time, we needed to increase our angle over the tree, which would sort of minimise the steeper we were over top of a tree, the more distance we would have available in front of us. If we were relatively shallow, we'd chew up a lot of the distance and it would be gone behind us. So that was part one of the equation, was sort of just trying to establish the maximum amount of grass. And we'd do that, settle on a 6 degree approach. The next part was, as Adam talked about, with the critical obstacle, or the tree. The tree itself was about 25 feet. Sorry, we're talking feet for the C-130, but that's just about 7 or so metres, 7.5 or so metres tall. And we had to decide, how much do we want to miss the tree by? What's our insurance policy? What's our safety margin? So we settled on 25 feet safety margin. So we had a 25-foot tree and a 25-foot safety margin to go above the top of it. And that's fairly standard for us in the C-130. Sort of, we'd like to use round figures, so 25 and 50 are sort of standard for us. 25 we selected in this case, knowing that we were looking at a 6 degree approach angle at 25 feet, gave us a usable runway length of 2,034 feet, just short of 700 metres or so to land the aircraft in here. At the same time, as Adam talked about, the Australians had basically drawn us a landing zone survey that meant that we could approach from sort of the southeast, or we could approach from the northwest. And on the northwest, we had significant issues with the critical obstacle being a much larger tree, meaning that if we were to come over top of that tree, we would not have enough runway left to land back this direction. So what we needed to take into account was that tree was still going to be there in the event that we needed to go around, or we made an aborted landing and we needed to carry on going forward. There's still a giant tree in our way at the other end. And again, we want to avoid that. So we looked at our options for the missed approach, or the climb out, and we determined that that was inside the normal gradients and wasn't going to be too much of a player for us. So having factored in some of the data that the Australians had given us, we started, well, we're simple people, so we'll draw a picture because that makes more sense. So we knew that Australians had told us we had just shy of 2,500 feet from the fence there on the public fence up to the end of the Wigram defence area fence up at the top of that red box, 2,500 feet. As I talked about before, we had this critical obstacle, we had this tree, and there's sort of one of the sayings in aviation is that there's a few useless things, and one of those is runway behind you. And that's exactly what we ended up in this scenario. So we actually lost about 400 feet of our 2,500 foot runway. That was completely unusable to us. It was going to be impossible to go from 50 feet crossing our threshold to 0 in an instant. The aircraft's still going to be in its descent angle and it's still going to take some time. So we lost 400 feet off the surveyed distance. So we went, okay, is that enough? So we went back into what's called our performance manual, or our performance chart. It's a book that's about this thick or so, and the flight engineers and the navigators sort of trawl through. It's full of graphs, tables, explanations. It's a book from the 1950s. This aircraft's a 1955 design. It's a bunch of tables and graphs that you get out your pencil and your ruler and you work out where you sit. Of course, in the modern day today, and particularly with the new aircraft, that's all computer algorithms and done by software for you. But in this case, it was in the book with a pencil and a ruler. And we tried to work out how much do we actually need. That was really the question we need to answer now, is have we got enough left? So we went into the box with our parameters, and we determined that we think, at this stage, we're going to need 1,600 feet. From wheels down, bring the aircraft to a stop. That in itself is a fairly short distance. And we sort of started working backwards. And we went, well, this is quite important. Normally we'd have a bit of a safety margin or insurance policy, a bit of a buffer. We determined that 200 feet was going to be an appropriate safety margin for this sort of slightly non-normal activity. And that's what that red box indicates at the top. We took from the end fence, we took back a 200-foot safety margin, and then we said, we believe it's going to take 1,600 feet to stop this machine. So we went back 1,600 feet, which comes to here. And the tricky part then became, it left us a landing zone of 234 feet. That's the green box. So remembering that because of the approach angle and the critical obstacle, it's not physically possible to put the wheels down before the start of the green box, but they absolutely have to be down by the end of the green box. Otherwise we don't have enough distance to stop and still have a safety margin at the end of 200 feet. And that's where we managed to draw out our little chart, and we went, okay, we think it can be done according to the performance manual. The navigators and flight engineers were still a little dubious with some of the figures. So we went, right, how do we sharpen the pencil, for lack of a better term? How do we make this even better? 1,600 feet is still good, but we'd like it to be less if we could. So we knew there was three things that were going to impact the performance of the aircraft as we put it down here on the grass. Kind of one of them we could do something about, the other two we were beholden to sort of the weather gods. So the first one was the aircraft weight. We knew that the lighter the aircraft was, the shorter distance it would take to stop. It's kind of like driving your ute or your car that's fully loaded. You apply the brakes. The more momentum and energy that vehicle has, the longer it will take to stop. It's no different with the aircraft, which is just a standard braking system. So we tried to get the aircraft as light as possible. Anything that wasn't bolted down, we took off the aircraft. Including some of the things that were bolted down, we got out the spanners and we undid the bolts and we took it off. If we didn't need it to operate the aircraft to get it in here, it came off. Mostly that was all the additional roll equipment. That was things like the vehicle ramps, the tie-down chains, the extra seats. Everything came off. It was put on a truck and delivered down here to the museum, hopefully with an aircraft to follow. So we managed to move about 7,000 pounds. And again, I know we were talking in feet earlier. We also talk in pounds for the aircraft weight. So we removed about 3 tonne or so, 3.5 tonne of weight from the aircraft, which was significant enough for us to go ahead with that weight loss program. It sort of went on a slight Jenny Craig diet for a period there. We managed to get the aircraft down to about 80,000 pounds of all up weight before we add fuel on top. So the other two pieces that we couldn't touch because we had no control over was the temperature. For those in the room who understand aviation, that probably makes sense, but for those who don't, the colder the temperature is, the better the aircraft engines will perform, and the thicker the air is, the more dense it is. So there's more resistance as an aircraft's trying to move through it. So that will slow us down faster, the colder the temperature. The warmer the temperature, the longer the distance it was going to take to stop the aircraft. And of course, we knew we were planning on doing this after the C-130H retirement date being in a January or so. So we're in the middle of summer, and those of you from Christchurch or the Canterbury region will understand that summer here can be scorching. So we knew we probably weren't looking at temperatures close to zero. It was going to be much higher. The other part was the wind. Because the Australians had given us a nice orientation of the landing zone survey and where we would get the maximum distance available, we knew the direction of the wind that we needed. And if we get a headwind component, so the wind's coming directly at the aeroplane, that has a slowing down effect. If we fly an indicated airspeed in the aircraft, so that's what it's being displayed on the gauge in front of me. If, for example, we're flying at 100 knots and we have a 10 knot headwind that's coming in an opposite direction to us, our speed across the ground would be 90 knots. The more headwind we have, the slower our speed across the ground. The slower our speed across the ground, the less energy we have to arrest in the landing piece, and the shorter our landing distance would be. So the more wind we could get coming directly at us, the better it was going to be for our landing distance. Of course, we don't control the temperature or the wind. But what we did do is we came up with some parameters, and we knew we needed some minimums. And that's what these charts here sort of display. These are straight out of the flight engineer. He spent months trying to work out to the foot exactly what it is that we need. But you can see here the main part is that at 24 degrees Celsius, outside temperature of 24 degrees, so a relatively mild summer day in Christchurch, we needed a minimum of a 7 knot headwind to get the aircraft in on the distance that we had available, 1,600 feet. So that's the wind there, 7 knot headwind. At 25 degrees, we now need an 8 knot headwind to come in under 1,600 feet. At 26 degrees, it's still an 8 knot headwind, but you can see the figures slowly creeping up, and I think it was at about 27 degrees Celsius, we now need a 9 knot headwind. And on the day, it was a balmy Christchurch Fern nor'wester, because guess what? Our runway direction was in a nor'westerly direction, which we always knew we'd get a strong nor'west wind, and that would come with the temperature. It was closer to 30 degrees on the day, meaning that we needed about a 9 knot headwind. So at this stage we've worked out, okay, we've stacked all the cards in our favour, the best possible that we can think. We've got the aircraft as light as we can. We've worked out a combination of temperature and headwind that can be plausible and that we could achieve this theoretically. Bear in mind at this point we're still sitting in our office. We're not out there in the aircraft having a go. We're sharpening pencils in the books. But we realised that there's still a little bit more we could do. One of which was to deviate from our normal operations, which normally requires 2 engines to be in reverse. The aircraft's fitted with 4 engines. We would always plan in normal circumstances that one of those engines would have a fault or a malfunction and therefore wouldn't be available to us. So we would only ever plan on 2, and that means that we would use the symmetrical engine on the other side. We wouldn't use reverse on that either. So we'd just have 2 engines in reverse. The engines themselves constantly spin in the same direction, but what actually changes is the paddles or the prop blades actually rotate. And if you think about it, if you've ever been kayaking, if you put your paddle in the water with a big flat face and you take a big swipe at the water, it's really hard to pull because there's a lot of resistance, but you'll propel your kayak forward a lot faster. If you put it through on its side, it'll just slice through and you'll go nowhere, but it's really easy to do. That's basically the same principle with the propellers. The more open face or the more square they are, the bigger bite or pull they'll take of the air, the more the aircraft will accelerate. And in the aircraft, we have the ability to reverse that pitch right backwards. And some of you might have seen that at Warbirds over Wanaka or the likes at air shows with C-130s backing up, just as if you were backing up your car. So what's actually happening there is that the air is being pushed in the opposite direction just due to the change in the paddle or change in the blade angle. So in this case, we determined that what we'd really like to do is plan 4 engines in reverse. And when we go back through our performance charts, that buys us a 200-foot margin. And you remember before we talked about our safety zone, the red box that was at the end of the picture, was selected to be 200 feet. Normally, we would have 500 feet. But we knew if we had a 1,600-foot landing distance required, we added 500 feet, we were already at 2,100 feet, and we only had 2,034 available. So standard safety buffer or a margin of 500 feet wasn't going to work for us. So we took the 200 feet that we know would be the difference between having all of our engines reversing, suffering a malfunction with one of them, and now only having 2 available, would cost us 200 feet. That would extend our landing distance by 200 feet. That's why we chose a 200-foot safety margin. The next thing we looked at is normally for our landing performance, we assume 50% of headwind. So we're landing in Christchurch. It's a 20 knot day. We've got 20 knots coming at us on the nose. We would only ever do our performance calculations on the assumption that we were getting half of that, so 10 knots. In this case, we had a minimum wind that we absolutely needed to be able to effectively, safely conduct the landing. So we needed a 100% live readout, and Adam will talk a little bit about that later on. But as the landing zone controller, he was giving us the direct wind feed of what was being experienced on the ground, and that was part of our criteria to go through. Normal operations, it just makes it easier to assume half, because if it goes up or down by a few knots here or there, you're not constantly having to readjust and perform your calculations. It's a bit of it's good enough. And the last being that our orders, our instructions, our procedures, and again, if you sort of go on Dr. Google, it'll tell you that sort of the minimum strip length for a C-130 is 3,000 feet. We didn't have 3,000 feet. We only had 2,034. So when we started thinking about this, we went, why does it say 3,000 feet? The reality is that the C-130 is a cargo transporter. It's there to move things and stuff or people to places. There's no good landing on a really short strip but being empty. The people in which you're coming to offer aid to will be slightly annoyed that you didn't bring anything. So we decided that actually the 3,000 foot wasn't applicable for us in this case. This was a one-way flight that wasn't going to carry anyone on board. It was minimum crew. We'd already stripped the aircraft to be as light as possible, and we ultimately wanted to remove the restriction on us, which was saying we couldn't land at an airfield less than 3,000 feet. All of these things are outside of my control, and I don't own those. Those are documented, normal planning procedures that we must comply with. So we needed to go to the Chief of Air Force, the dashing man that you saw in the video earlier, and it was ultimately his approval that we needed to deviate from some of those normal activities, which are those ones there. And of course, after robust discussion and debate, including a whole raft of our team, including our flight safety mechanisms, we put it up to the Chief of Air Force, and we said, with these deviations, sir, we theoretically believe it is possible and achievable to land a C-130 onto the LZ at Wigram. So we think we could. It's now over to you to determine whether we should do that and whether you think that's a good idea. Adam will talk about what happened next, but ultimately the Chief of Air Force gave us the approval and we kicked into some practical testing.
So in January this year, this was still a theory. We didn't actually know how this was going to go or how this was going to play out when we physically tried in the aircraft. If you're landing on a normal aircraft, you'll land about 1,000 feet into the runway. That's what they aim for. On a normal tactical assault strip on a C-130, on a normal landing zone, we aim for a 500-foot box. We had a 234-foot box to aim for, so half again. So first attempt at doing this was in Whenuapai. We laid out the 234-foot box on the seal runway in Whenuapai. This looks very small. The crew started on a normal profile, aiming for that 1,000-foot inset, bringing it back 3 or 4 attempts, slowly bringing the aim point back to start aiming for that box. And on the first one, they missed by quite a significant margin. So, this might be a step too far. Over the rest of that flight, the crew refined it, moved the aim point back, and started touching down inside that 234-foot box. Bearing in mind they're still trying to clear the threshold at 50 feet, so making sure we're missing the tree in the house with an appropriate safety margin, as discussed. On the final one, Whenuapai landed full max effort braking, so full braking performance like what was used out here, and that was to give us confidence in what the performance manual told us our braking performance was. Noting there are differences between seal and grass, but it was a starting point, at least to give us some confidence in what the book said. From there we moved to Woodburn for a number of reasons. One, it was a grass runway, but two, it's also orientated and laid out very similar to Wigram with the taxiway through the middle. So we could use Woodburn to assess the performance on the grass, but also assess how the aircraft would perform if and when we had to cross that taxiway under braking. Again, a couple of flights out of Woodburn, putting it consistently into that 234-foot box, clearing on a visual picture and confirmed under radar altimeter that they were crossing the threshold at 50 feet. And then again, a full max effort landing onto the grass in Woodburn in early February, where they stopped before the taxiway. Now, that's great, but it also didn't give us the data we needed for crossing that taxiway. There are a couple of, I suppose, concerns or questions we still had. Blenheim and Marlborough in February this year was very brown, very dry. The grass was more like concrete, and we knew that Wigram here, from coming down and looking at it, was still very green, still very lush. So we didn't know what that difference was going to be, so we still had questions. But we ran it through the numbers, and we assessed that it was still a good option to continue. So through this, there's a slightly amended crew work cycle with the crew. Brad's talked about ground speed being the critical factor. So the co-pilot was focused on the ground speed. We've talked about the rad-out height crossing the house. The navigator was focused on that, and the loadmasters were focused on the hydraulic system, which is what provides us flight controls and braking under serious load to check that system wasn't going to have a malfunction when we touched down. Throughout all this, it was probably 30 or 40 repetitions over about 3 flights to consistently put it in the box. And the crew got to a point where it was a speak by exception model, where everyone kind of knew what they were doing and everyone was focused on their individual tasks in that last 50 to 100 feet of the approach. So after we retired the fleet, 31st of January and then Waitangi weekend, we pivoted towards what's next for 01. When are we going to actually do this? So we knew roughly what the weather required was from our planning. We knew we could get it in here based on what we'd done, or we at least thought what we'd done previously. So one final time, we saw a weather window on the Wednesday. One final time, we all travelled down to Woodburn, the crew, the maintenance and my team, all headed to Woodburn for one final practice. And that was the last time we were going to confirm the performance and confirm we were happy to proceed before we had a crack coming to Wigram. Tuesday was unsuitable here. It actually rained. So this throws another variable at us. The ground is now wet. But Wednesday was still looking favourable. So my team and I came down to Wigram to meet up with the team of Air Force planners who were already here, who had been doing the liaising with Christchurch Council, Christchurch Airport, Fire and Emergency, St John's, New Zealand Police, and looking after the wider ground setup here. We made the weather call Wednesday morning that we're on. We think we've got the forecast. So we laid out the LZ, checked the layout, and then waited for the forecast wind to arrive. The team in Woodburn actually delayed and waited for the wind shift to come through. The wind shift was later than we thought. And then after some time taking photos one last time in 01, the team turned up just before 4 p.m. The first touch and go was always planned. The boss will talk about the Wigram effect later, but the first time the crew had actually seen what Wigram looks like was when they turned up on that day. So the touch and go was always planned. Went off perfectly, inside the box nicely, just we didn't have the wind. They were too fast. They headed off to the coast to hold for 10, 15, 20 minutes, wait for the wind to increase. And at that stage, I didn't think we were going to get it done. We hadn't seen the wind we needed all afternoon, and the wind at that stage of the afternoon, it was a lovely 29, 30 degrees and about 3 to 4 knots of wind. So I personally didn't think we were going to get it done, but then true to the weather forecast, the wind shift came in and we got sort of 10 to 12 knots of wind consistently, and that's when the team came back and the second attempt was successful.
All right, so we'd actually done it, I suppose. We'd been on this journey for close to 18 months or so, and we'd achieved it. We'd safely landed 01 at Wigram. And was anyone here? Did anyone see it? All right, cool. So what you might notice is that it was extremely successful, and where we thought we were going to take 1,600 feet to stop, that's what the books told us, that we would touch down in the green box and we would come to a stop just before the red one. We actually stopped really fast, or really short. This black line here indicates where the wheels touch down. That's the main landing gear where they touch down in the box. And the black line across the top indicates where we came to a stop. So it was extremely successful. Of course, being sort of slight, sort of aviation nerds and geeks, we sort of went, why? Why was it so good? It wasn't because of my skills, I can tell you that. But we actually brought the aircraft to a stop at 273.5 metres, or 897 feet, so you can see on there. Bearing in mind we expected that the books were going to tell us 1,600. The aircraft landed at 88,000 pounds. That was about an 80,000 pound weight plus 8 or so thousand pounds of fuel that we had on board. That was within the realms of what we anticipated and expected. So there was no savings there. The reasons that we started concluding was that this thing here primarily, it's called the runway condition rating or the runway condition reading. And it's an arbitrary figure which we used as 12. And in the aviation community, all that is sort of a quantifier. Now RCR of 12 equates to dry grass. Your landing surface, dry grass, okay, use a factor of 12 in your charts. So that's what we did. However, 12 for dry grass, it doesn't matter whether that's the most manicured sort of golf green you've ever seen, or a cricket pitch in the middle of Pakistan that's been meticulously maintained for decades. It's the same sort of quantifying factor as a wet muddy paddock in the middle of winter in Ashburton. It's RCR 12. So what we suspect is that that's a very pessimistic figure. It's a worst case planning scenario, so that any aircraft landing on dry grass is never going to be caught out and not having the braking coefficient or the effectiveness that you thought you would have. So for us, we went out and had a look afterwards again, because we were pretty interested in this. We went and had a look at where did the aircraft actually land, what did it look like. And there were sort of two trenches from the landing gear that you could sort of clearly see out in the field. And the sort of top 5 to 10 mils or so had sort of been scuffed off as the wheels were massive wheels, big bouncy inflation tyres, huge anti-skid braking system. And it just dragged the sort of 5 or 10 mils off the top, which was sort of the really short blades of grass and the fibrous root system. Beneath that, sort of the exposed trenches was just rock hard. It was really hard, despite the fact that it had been a relatively wet summer in Christchurch and that it had rained only the day before. But it was rock hard. So the actual braking surface that the wheels were being applied to had a far higher braking coefficient than that of sort of what we anticipated with 12. And we expect that when we reverse engineered this back through the books, that the landing surface was actually more like landing on a dry road, and it was really hard. So that gave us a significant saving. The other part being that, as Adam described, the Wigram factor. We had no idea exactly what it was going to look like or feel like flying over top of somebody's house so low. That is a non-normal activity. When you think about airports and runways, it doesn't make sense to have houses right at the end of them. So normally there's this big clear piece as you approach. You've got a really nice, no obstacles in your way. Likewise on the departure, it's a nice clear. It's designed that way. Unfortunately, Wigram used to be designed that way and someone filled it in with houses. So we didn't know what that was going to actually feel like or look like. We couldn't exactly go out there and just ask people, can we just start flying at your house to see what it's like? We'd really like to give that a go. So That was the wigram factor. We didn't know what it was going to look like until we rolled the aircraft out onto a long final approach. Luckily for us, it was exactly as we'd planned. It was exactly as we had practiced 30, 40 times before. The profile worked, and when we were looking out of the windscreen, direct line of sight for us to where we intend the aircraft to touch down. There's no obstacles in the way. Even though there was houses and trees, they were outside of our periphery, and it really wasn't the sort of shock and awe factor that we thought we might have had. So we were really comfortable with where we were projecting. That's why the first one was planned to be a touch and go, to make sure that we were comfortable with that. We didn't anticipate that we would actually bring that first one all the way down to the surface, but we were that comfortable rolling out that it was exactly as we'd planned. There was no need to go around from an earlier height, and we thought we would check our ability to put it in the box. But what did that actually mean practically? That meant that we were able to aim, for the start of this box, where we thought we were going to be right on the numbers, crossing the tree, and then have this real challenge of trying to get the aircraft wheels down in such a short distance, 234 feet. We were able to aim ever so slightly even shorter than we'd anticipated, which allowed us to put the wheels down quite early in the touchdown box. So about 150 feet before our last point of wheels down. That bought us another 150 feet of braking time. And that again brought back our stopping distance from where we thought. And the last one being that we were slightly slower across the ground, which was really helpful. So we think this was the most challenging part in all of the practical aspects of it, was only having a 230-foot box. So if we're at a 6-degree descent angle, and I'm not sure, I don't have a ruler, but I'm not sure if that's 6 degrees, it's probably quite steep. But anyway, you'll get the point is that we can't just land the aircraft like that. I don't think the Chief of Air Force would have been quite so happy if we had done that. So we're pointing the aircraft at this place, and the aircraft needs to transition from this attitude, or an attitude similar to this, to a point at which we can safely put the wheels on the ground first and not the radome. And so in that piece, one, that chews up distance and it chews up time because the aircraft's still moving forward at the same time. That was the real challenge behind trying to get the wheels down at 234 feet. But the second part to that is that the aircraft's actually designed to fly in similar attitudes to this. So the airflow over the aircraft is quite smooth at this point. And as we start to adjust the aircraft attitude, we end up exposing far more of the aircraft surface. And it's kind of like, if you've ever been, I know it's not just children, but parents as well, you put your hand out the window of the car as you're driving down the road, and there's sort of a real resistance on it and forcing your hand back. You can open your fingers, the air's able to flow more freely. Close your fingers, there's a lot more drag. That's exactly what happens to the aircraft. So as it does that, the wind's starting to impact more on the structure and slow the aircraft down in that process. And from our testing in Woodburn, we found that the aircraft probably loses between 2 to 3 knots in that process. So where we'd been planning a 97 knot approach speed, which would give us a minimum or a maximum ground speed of 89 knots, we were actually bleeding off a little bit of that energy in the flare, which just meant the aircraft was slightly slower, the brakes were more effective, and we had a shorter stopping distance yet again. So ultimately, we went from a theoretical, the air component commander standing out on the paddock saying, yeah, you'll be right, to actually achieving a really successful activity that was done with all of our safety margins and approvals in place, and we stopped the aircraft in half the distance basically that we'd expected to consume. What we were worried about, right? That's kind of the gist of that. But the job wasn't quite over there, because ultimately we needed to preserve this aircraft for the generations to come.
So after we'd finished high-fiving each other for what was a good, successful job, maintenance still had some significant work to do. So the engines and APU, or auxiliary power unit, were filled with an inhibiting oil. So it's a slightly thicker than normal oil, and that's to preserve the rubber seals from deteriorating so it doesn't leak oil all over the museum's floor. If you've been out to the hangar and seen 01, the propellers look like they're covered in some sort of brown compound. That's a corrosive preventative sealant almost to protect the propellers. The armament components, so small explosive charges that we have in our fire extinguishers for all the engines. They were removed. The flare pistol that used to sit above my head at the navigator station, that was removed with the associated flares. And then anything that the organisation deemed that we could use for C-130J. So it is a common airframe since it was first produced. So the C-130J uses the base model airframe of a C-130. So there is commonality of spares across both. So things like the radar, life rafts, radios, GPS antennas, GPS processors, we removed those to be able to use on the C-130J. The hydraulic system, in a similar way to the engines, depressurised and the exposed plates covered in a thicker grease to help with the preservation. There's still fuel on board. The team didn't run it empty, so that was drained about 9,000 pounds worth of fuel drained from the aircraft. And then because it was so light and we'd stripped it so much out of it, we had to tie it down so it didn't move. So the big concrete blocks next to 01 in that photo are what we stripped it down to, because with it being so light, any sort of strength of wind would have pushed the aircraft around, moved it around on that apron, or if it was in the right direction, possibly could have even lifted the nose, started to move it around. So from there, we walked away and the museum carefully removed the tail. I got told off for saying they chopped the tail off it yesterday, and then backed 01 into its temporary hangar space. So that's how we got 01 to where it is today. Probably got about 5-10 minutes for some questions.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, did you have anything to do with the fact that a C-130 flew out of Christchurch to Blenheim during the afternoon and then came back at low level a bit later? It confused a lot of people and who thought that nothing was happening that day.
Good confusion from everyone. No, that was
a deception plan.
Completely unrelated by the New York Air National Guard with their skier.
Or was it coincidence?
Yeah, no, it was completely unrelated.
Yeah. Yeah. So their aircraft headed up to Blenheim for a servicing that Airbus was conducting on their behalf. There was actually 2 of them. They brought a second one up to bring the crew back to Christchurch following it. So yeah, not related, but they certainly blocked us in and got in our way. That's for sure. So we had 6 C-130s sitting in Woodburn for a little while there, which was pretty cool.
Two things about it. I think somebody should rewrite the manual for the C-130. They haven't done that. And also, C-130, could she take off again if she really had to from 0 on that runway?
Well, the museum doesn't want it to.
The museum will tell us no.
The museum says no.
It's here for life. Look, that was part of our interest as well, for sure. So, and actually on the way down from Blenheim, we were trying to fly a relatively slow regime on the way down because we hadn't seen the winds yet, and we were trying to fill in a little bit of time. One thing we did was we took the opportunity to take some photos, of course, because we were the last operators of this aircraft after 60 years. But the other part that we did was try and work out, do we reckon we could take off? And again, sort of similar to the concept of how this was born, we think it's plausible, yeah. We think you could get it out of here. Subject to that tree, probably. That would be my main concern.
Take top off the tree.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
2 questions, I guess, about these trees. Trees can be trimmed. I appreciate a house can't be, but was there a reason why we didn't trim the tree? That's one question. The second question, you pulled in the Australians to help with this calculation. Given this plane had been flying for 60 years in probably very remote locations where runways are not necessarily designed to be perfection, has the work that you've done over the last 60 years leading up to this been implemented into it, and then all the work that's gone into here, how has that changed planning going forward for, say, peacekeeping or dropping aid and so forth?
All right. I'll answer the tree question.
Okay.
You can answer
Sure.
Yeah, so yes, the tree. Yeah, so when we looked at the actual, the angle of the tree and our crossing height, etc., we thought, okay, maybe we could remove that tree. The challenge we had was that just in behind that tree was actually the roof line of the lovely British couple's home. And we've been and met them a couple of times to make sure they were happy with exactly what was about to occur. They were extremely happy. They ended up basically having a party that afternoon, and everyone was at their house. But yeah, just in behind on sort of the similar approach angle was their rooftop. And we sort of thought, okay, we cut the tree down, we'll bulldoze their house. They didn't like it anyway. And then in behind that was the lampposts that were out on the road. So it was sort of this piece of how far do we go? And ultimately what we did was we said, well, the Australians have given us these parameters. If we can't achieve with the parameters that we've been given, then it's not a good idea. And the answer is we'll go back to the Chief of Air Force and say we don't think this is plausible. So yeah, it was an option set, but had it have only been the tree and empty space beyond, I think we probably would have got to that point. But the reality was it was going to make a very minor difference. We were only talking a few feet because the next obstacle was the actual ridgeline of the house. I'll let Adam explain.
It is kind of an unusual activity that we carried out here in terms of C-130 operators around the world. There's a lot of interest around the world of how we did it and what we did on that day. So the Australians, with their report, we've provided them this brief and some additional data. They're going to use that as a case study for what they can do as an airfield survey team, basically turning a paddock into a usable runway. As we talked about through the presentation, the C-130 is used to deliver and remove things from a war zone, humanitarian, a disaster relief area. So some of those landing strips are still quite short. We regularly go overseas and practice on 3,500, 4,000 foot gravel strips where there's a 500 foot box and you have to put it inside that box, otherwise you go around. Similar concept to this. So although that's not in a suburban area. So similar concept. So a lot of the training and a lot of our tactical training and tactical flying builds up to being able to do something like this. We talk about a 6-degree approach. That's not an unusual approach for us to fly in a tactical environment or a threat environment. So across the 60 years of operating the C-130, these are all skills that we have built up, and through the boss's flying career, he has used them in different areas, just not, and then obviously culminated in putting it into a suburban area. But yeah, we talk about there's commonality and transferability of what we did here into other roles, and we do.
Yeah, the key difference here was the length available. So, I mean, in the world, they'll just run bulldozers through jungles and they'll just plough 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet of dirt or gravel, and that can be achieved. But the real challenge for us was the actual distance, and short of bulldozing houses and motorway overbridges, it just was never going to get longer.
And between the suburbia, did you have to have a clearance, like an air zone clearance? Like, do the neighbours have to make sure there was no drones being flown? You know, be letting off fireworks, you know, that sort of thing.
So here sits inside Christchurch control zone. So technically there should be no drones flying here without Christchurch Tower approval. So we worked with Christchurch Tower for the airspace piece, and then part of the wider engagement with the community from both the museum staff and some of our squadron members were to go and door knock and talk to members of the community around here. So especially those on the approach path, so those are the ones we were definitely going to fly over on both approach and departure off the other side, and sort of not so much say, hey, we don't want you in your house, because if we thought we were going to crash into the house, we shouldn't really be doing this, but more to engage with them. What are your concerns? The Herc is quite a loud aircraft at low altitude, so probably lock your dog inside or maybe take your dog for a walk somewhere else for the day. Just engaging with the community that way to make sure that everyone was on board.
Any more questions?
Did you ever think it could stop in such a short space?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I mean, to be totally honest, I mean, as Adam was alluding to, when we started looking at this practically in Whenuapai, There was a moment in time where I thought it couldn't be done at all. Being able to transition the aircraft from a relatively steep descent and put the wheels down in a short finite piece, I mean, that was a challenge. But we always, from years of operating the aircraft, we knew that there was pessimism in the performance charts, and that's why we really wanted to go out there and sort of get after the practical piece of it, which is always a nice way to be. It's great to have an operator manual that you're not going to exceed what it says, because that'll be very bad, but you're always going to be inside the envelope. So we did know it would stop relatively short. We probably didn't think it was going to stop that short. We probably thought from our practical testing that maybe we might do 1,200 feet, and obviously we were sub 900, so it was pretty good. Yes, sir.
That's what the timeline is before the plane will be sort of generally available part of the museum.
Sorry, what was that question?
When's it ready to display?
Okay, yeah, so as you'll appreciate, fundraising is a little bit unpredictable. Yeah. You're subject to a lot of, what's the economy doing at the time, what organisations can you draw in to help support you, etc., etc. So where we're at right now is that our trust board are looking to employ a fundraiser, actually create a position so we can get somebody with previous experience and a track record to come in and formulate the whole strategy, and then we'll be kicking off with that as soon as we possibly can. I mean, we're already gratefully receiving donations from members of the public, and all of that's already going into the pot. We've had our submission in with Christchurch City Council for $5 million as part of their long-term planning. So, lobby your MPs, go and protest outside Parliament. Anything you can do to support our submission, with the council is terrific. And keep an eye on our website. There'll be regular news updates about how the fundraising is going and all the initiatives that we've got. You've got corporate sums of money, your big cornerstone donors, but also ways of engaging with the public so that you guys can continue to contribute in whatever way you can. But yeah, so over the next wee while, keep an eye on the website, and there'll be lots of news on how that's going. We've kind of got this ambition that we can perhaps turn the first sod on the 1st of April 2027, which is the I think that's right, again. 90th anniversary of the formation of the RNZF. That would be really good. You would have seen the film in the atrium on the big screen TV, showing the sort of digital artist's impression of what the building is going to look like. It's a really basic metal framed, a Calder Stewart special. Doesn't need to be anything flashier than that. So we've kept the building as simple as we can, because that brings the financial target down. It will need to be climate controlled so that we can take the best possible care of these two large complex airframes. But yeah, just keep an eye out on our website.
Is the Orion here already?
Yes, it is. That's in Hangar 3.
So we don't have to do it again?
Yeah, we had open days for that last year, which went really, really well. So yes, for both aircraft, and we may well add other aircraft from the collection into that space as well. It just depends on a few other things that go on.
Yeah, but we'll be visible.
Purchase those helps.
Merch, thanks. Yeah, that's one way that you can help. Make a contribution at the moment. Buy something from the shop, because all of that money goes into the pot for the new building. So I should have modelled one of these as I came on from stage left. Yeah, brilliant. And the guys are happy to autograph these as well if you buy one. So that's even better. Don't want to see them on trade. Thanks for the question.
Any more questions? One more, yes? Yes, sir?
Did you use standard tyre pressures or soft field tyre pressures?
Soft field.
And, at what point did you select reverse pitch on the round out or after touchdown?
Yeah, we deflated the tyres, so similar to if you take your four-wheel drive out on the sand, the lower the tyre pressure, the better grip it's going to have, or the more surface areas in contact with the ground. So we definitely went for soft tyre pressures. And the flight engineer went out there on the morning and rechecked all of those before we left Woodburn. And then reverse pitch was selected to the best of my ability, the moment at which I believed that the nose landing gear was on the ground. And I mean, the intent was sort of where a normal aircraft would sort of round out, and you would touch down your main wheels and then slowly lower the nose wheel in due course. The intent was to try and get all three touch at the same time, stick to the ground, and then select reverse. So the intent was to do it instantaneously. I had my back pressed as hard into the back of the seat as I possibly could, as my feet were on the brake pedals, giving it everything I could give it, and selected full reverse. At the same time, as part of that, one of the pieces we worked through the amended work cycle, and again is a piece that comes from our normal short airfield work, is the co-pilot selected the flaps from 100%, so we had maximum drag down to keep the aircraft slow and generate a lot of lift. At slow speeds, the co-pilot sucked those all the way up to zero, and the intent there was to remove the lift being generated by having a big sort of aerofoil out there, and that would put more aircraft weight onto the tyres, and therefore the brakes could really work a lot harder. That was the intent behind that.
These guys will be around too for more questions if you wanted to also be back out at that hangar if you've got any questions out there as well. One burning question I've got actually for Adam with the upgraded J. Some say there's an upgrade and some say it may not be an upgrade in terms of important things like pies, because the H model's got an oven with the crispy pies, and I heard that the J's got a microwave, so it's soggy pies. Any chance of upgrading that J with a nice oven?
We'll try and convince the engineers to let us swap it out.
On behalf of the museum, it's been amazing to have this presentation from the amazing crew from 40 Squadron, and an amazing effort to get this aircraft in. And again, just a thank you to the service and sacrifice of so many of our men and women in service today. It's just a round of applause for